Hi, everyone. So I do multilingual translation. I do Spanish and Russian, but I also speak Polish, Norwegian, and English. And I would like to ask you a question. How many of you learned a second language at school at some point? Raise your hands. Okay, yeah, that's everyone actually. Brilliant. Okay, follow-up question. How many of you actually speak another language fluently? Raise your hands again. Yeah, that's way less people. And this, of course, makes sense because we do live in the UK, which is an English-speaking country, and English is the dominant language worldwide. In fact, 55% of the internet is in English. So this is normal, but this also means that me being a multilingual person, I get a lot of interesting questions on a daily basis. Questions such as, what language do you think in? Or don't you mix them up? Or isn't it very confusing inside your head? So in the UK, knowing a second language feels a bit like magic or witchcraft or this special ability you're born with. However, worldwide, it's actually very common to speak multiple languages. In fact, monolingualism is less common than being bilingual or multilingual. In fact, 40% of the world is monolingual, whilst 43% is bilingual and 17% speak 3 or more languages. So why is it so much harder for us here in the UK to learn another language? Why is it such a challenge? Well, let me bring you some good news. A big part of the problem, it's not you, it's the education system. What do I mean by that? Well, the way grammar is taught, it tends to be completely out of context, which isn't helpful at all, because there's so much more emphasis on remembering the rule than on being able to actually apply it and understand it. Same goes for vocabulary. I think we have all seen those glossary lists at school, words that we had to memorize before a test or an exam. They're actually not very helpful, because a big part of the meaning is lost through them. In fact, the linguist Saussure goes as far as to say that a word isolated like this, a word out of context, has no meaning at all and only gains context through interacting with other words. Let me demonstrate for an example. If I say, ладонь, this probably tells you nothing, right? But if I add context and say, ладонь, you can probably figure out that I'm referring to my wrist, or maybe my fingers, or maybe this motion. And if I add even more words and more context and say, это рука, это ладонь, это палец, with the added context, you can now easily figure out how the word makes sense. Yet another thing that schools do very poorly is they don't focus on our individual interests. We do general topics, such as daily routines, school supplies, topics no one really finds interesting, and there's no attempt made at making that interesting. And the last, and in my opinion, most tragic thing that schools do wrong is they make it all stressful. There's a lot of focus on studying for tests, for exams, getting the best grades possible. And worst of all, there's a lot of pressure to speak in front of your peers, which, when you think about it, it's extremely nerve-wracking, because not only are you forced to do public speaking, something that's already inherently very, very scary, but you have to do it in a language you barely understand. So, okay, we discussed how not to learn a language, but how can you actually do it? Because there are so many benefits to being multilingual. Knowing multiple languages creates connections in your brain, and those connections, they can delay Alzheimer's by up to 6 years. Knowing several languages also opens multiple doors. You can meet so many amazing people from across the globe just by speaking their language. You can also consume media from different countries. In fact, my favorite book of all time, Leta в пионерском галстуке, is written in Russian and has never been translated to English. So had I not learned Russian, I would have never experienced this amazing book. So, okay, we established that language learning is not magic, it's not witchcraft, it's not just memorizing rules in a vacuum. So what is it actually like then? Well, I like to think that it's as simple as going to the gym. And by that, I mean two things. Number one, it's all about consistency. Consistency matters above all else. It's not talent, it's not skill, it's just how often you do something. And number two, well, in the gym, if you want to progress, you need to be adding more and more weights. And the same principle applies to language learning. So without further ado, let's jump into it. Let's discuss how we can actually learn another language. Step one, listen. Don't speak. I know that schools tell us that it's super important to speak a lot of the time, to practice conversation regularly, but it's actually a lot more important to first build up comprehension. Because trying to speak a language you don't understand very well, it's very confusing. It's a bit like trying to play Urszula without having read the notes and having only heard the melody once. Step two, and this is my favorite step, enjoy, have fun, do things you're passionate about in another language. It can be books, movies, podcasts, video games. Whatever you enjoy doing, do that in another language. Maybe start simple. Maybe just rewatch your favorite movie in Spanish. Or maybe read Harry Potter in French. There are so many things you can do that are fun. Number three, and this is going back to the gym metaphor, make it harder. Add weight. That's how you keep progressing. So maybe start simple. Maybe do Harry Potter first, and then move on to more complex things. And as your comprehension grows, your ability to speak will naturally follow. So to give you an example, when I was first getting into Russian, I was watching cartoons and sitcoms. And now I can read Dostoevsky. And you might be thinking, wow, this sounds amazing. This sounds so fun. But how does it actually work? I mean, is there any research behind this? And the answer is, yes, there is. The linguist Stephen Krashen has dedicated a lot of his lifetime to showing just how simple language learning is, and to how adults can acquire another language just by interacting with content they find fun. And in fact, remember the thing I said earlier, that 55% of the internet is in English? Well, this means that English content is a lot more accessible than content in other languages. And we can now observe that people all across the world are becoming more fluent in English, not because they have better education systems, not because they're studying hard at school, not because they're traveling to the UK and the US, but just because they're watching content they find fun. And so, who knows? Maybe you're like me. Maybe your favorite book is also in Russian. Or maybe your future partner speaks German. Languages can literally open so many doors, and language learning is fun and exciting and just as simple as going to the gym. And so I encourage you to go out there and explore our amazing multilingual world. Thank you so much.